Welcome to the Psychedelia Podcast, where we talk about the third wave of psychedelics. Through our many wide-ranging conversations with scientists, policymakers, entrepreneurs, and event organizers, we bring you an exclusive look into the many minds of the psychedelic world. It's time to let the word out about psychedelics and how they can be used as tools to benefit both the individual and the community. Welcome to the third wave.
Hey listeners, and welcome back to the Psychedelia Podcast. Wow, what a week this past week it has been, at least for me personally as well, for the third wave. Lots of things going on. I'm currently in Lisbon, Portugal, where yesterday I interviewed a neuroscientist who is a research director at an institute in Lisbon, studies serotonin in animals, and he leads a team of 20 researchers for that. And that was an excellent podcast. I had him over to the apartment that I'm staying at. We did an in-person podcast, which I'm really starting to like and prefer even. And I think that was one of the best podcasts that we've done. However, this week we have Michael Kostouris, and I did this podcast with him in person when I was in the Bay Area for psychedelic science. I'll get into a few more details about Michael in a little bit here. Before I get into those details, I want to just do a recap of this week in psychedelics. This is a weekly thing that we do where I just get you up to date with the latest news in the psychedelic space and sometimes in the larger drug policy and cannabis world. So for this week in psychedelics, we have a few pieces of really important information. First of all, as I mentioned at the beginning, things have been crazy this past week. On Saturday, the New York Times published an article in the style section about the recent psychedelic conference. The headline online was Molly at the Marriott inside America's premier psychedelics conference. I prefer the title MDMA at the Marriott. I think Molly has too many negative connotations and associations with it. So although a clever title, I think it mischaracterizes what's going on in the psychedelic space. There are a few other what I found to be mischaracterizations in the piece. However, this is how it goes. You take some, you give some. When you're working with journalists, the journalist who wrote that piece, I had a chance to get to know at the Psychedelic Science Conference. My impression of her is overall very positive. But that article, it sent some shockwaves through the psychedelic space. It was an objective, skeptic look at what's going on currently in the psychedelic space, and it sent a lot of people reeling. And I don't think a lot of people knew how to respond to it. Overall, I thought the piece was positive. It was on the front page of the style section in the New York Times on Sunday. It was certainly positive for us, largely because we're the first organization. I was the first individual mentioned in the piece, which just helps in terms of visibility. Obviously, as many of you have experienced, the farther you read down the piece, the more likely you are to exit the piece. And so the higher up you are, the better off you are. And so it was an honor and a privilege to be placed at that height, so to say. And I have had a lot of questions and correspondence since that point. So we'll put up a link to that New York Times article so that you can see it. There is a Good Samaritan law in Canada that was just implemented, and now you can call 911 for an overdosing friend without being put up on drug charges. This is an extremely important step in fighting the opioid epidemic caused by fentanyl-contaminated heroin. Fantastic. That's great. That's necessary. That's important. ASAP Science, who has about 6.5 million subscriptions on YouTube, mentioned microdosing in a new video. This new video is titled Your Brain on LSD and Acid, and so far it's gotten 760,000 views on YouTube. And the question they ask is, what happens to your brain and your body when you take acid? And in this video, they actually discuss the phenomena of microdosing. So check out that video if you want a little 3.5-minute overview of what happens to your brain when you take these substances. I think it's a cool little video, and I think you guys will enjoy it. Last thing, there is the first ever cannabis drive-through that is now open. It is in Colorado, obviously, and it's called Tumbleweed Express Drive-Through. It's in Parachute, Colorado, and you can pull up there and you can buy your cannabis and you can drive off. Nothing better for the American consumer than takeaway cannabis. Couple more things. This is kind of just a last note for this week in psychedelics. I've been asked to speak at the Next Web conference on microdosing psychedelics. So this is a business conference. This is a tech conference. Last year in 2016, it was named the best business conference in Europe. When I was in Amsterdam at the end of March, I had the opportunity to spend time at the house of one of the co-founders. We had a party, private, and we had a dinner thing. And I spoke to microdosing up to a few people there. And through that relationship, I was just asked at the last minute to speak at the conference. So I'm trying to prepare basically a talk from scratch, which I imagine will go well. It will be, I think, the most important talk I've done so far. So if you are listening to this, send some good vibes. I think everything will go well. And, I think what's important about doing things like this, speaking at conferences that are outside the psychedelic space, is you're largely speaking to a psychedelic naive or just psychedelic kind of curious audience. A lot of these people don't necessarily have psychedelic experience. So it's important that we use platforms like this to continue to spread education and knowledge about the utility of these substances. So that's it for this week in psychedelics. Check out the New York Times article, The Good Samaritan Law in Canada, the video on ASAP Science about LSD in your brain, the first ever cannabis drive-through, and the Next Web conference. And that will be on Friday, May 19. We will stream it. I think there's going to be a live stream, but I will double check on that. Maybe there won't be. I don't know. If there is, we'll provide a link. If there isn't, we'll try to get a recording and provide that to you guys later on. Now, for this question. So I also mentioned how we're going to start to do a questions section at the end of each podcast. So that's coming up at the end of the podcast. So if you want to hear and see if your question has been featured in our podcast this week, please be sure to stay tuned in to the end of the episode. On that same note, if you do have questions about psychedelics or about the third wave or about anything that we're doing and you'd like me to answer them on air, please send them in. You can submit them on Twitter, Facebook, email, contact@thethirdwave.co, and we'll pick 3 questions for each week and we will respond to them. Last thing, and the most important thing, is the podcast itself. So this week I interviewed Michael Kostouris, who is the founder of Entrepreneurs Awakening, which is a business mastermind where Michael creates a space for ambitious individuals to go and have an ayahuasca experience as an initiation into a larger 3-month process of coaching and development. And in this podcast, you're going to hear about why the ayahuasca ceremony is such an integral part of what Michael does with his IN business coaching. We're also going to talk about Michael's extensive experience with plant medicines, why he decided to combine the lessons of ayahuasca with his entrepreneurial flair to produce a groundbreaking business model, and various other things like what does it mean to pick a good ayahuasquero, what is the downside if you don't pick a good ayahuasquero, and various other questions specific to the psychedelic experience. This is of a different one. Most of the interviews we've done so far, this podcast started by largely interviewing people in the psychedelic space, people who you see at conferences, people who you talk to at conferences, people who work for MAPS or for DPA or who are, scientists or have written books about psychedelics. A lot of our future guests are going to be people who you don't really know from psychedelics, but maybe you will know them from other areas of life. So I'm not going to necessarily announce those guests on air right now, but we have a New York Times bestseller who will be on the podcast in the next month or so. That is one highlight. We have a guy who wrote a book about psychedelics that was very mainstream in the past couple months who I'm hoping to get on. We have someone who runs a blog about nootropics who will be coming on. So we'll have lots of interesting interviews to share with you in the future from people who you haven't necessarily heard from before. Last thing last, this podcast is completely 100% supported by you, the listener. We run on a donation basis. I have no future plans to create advertisements or put advertisements on this podcast, and I'm really trying to do my best to step away from the advertising model. I think it's distracting, I think it's superficial, and I think it sells our attention for money. And I think with the economy that we currently live in, our attention is valuable, and it should not be distracted on superficial, largely useless things. There are obviously products and services that I believe in. At the same time, I think the work that we're doing with psychedelics is the most important work that we can do. So if you can afford it, if you can manage, if you believe in what we're doing, and if you want to see this podcast continue to increase in quality, go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/thethirdwave. Please make a small donation. We have updated the prizes on the page so they're even more comprehensive than before. There are lots of options. And from this point forward, Patreon supporters will get exclusive access to various things. They'll get exclusive access to content before it's published on the main site. They'll get exclusive sneak peeks into podcast interviews. They will also receive first tickets to workshops that we do and talks that I do. So for example, I'm doing a talk on June 8th in New York City. Patreon supporters will get first access to purchase those tickets, and those tickets will sell very fast as there are only 70 available. So make a donation if you can. We would really appreciate it. It just helps us go a little bit faster. Our model is not based on consumerism. Our model is based on healing, and that requires, while we still live in this time and age, some level of financial support. So enjoy the podcast, and if you like it, leave a review on iTunes. We're here, basically in San Rafael, right?
Yeah.
The home of Michael Costuras, who leads business masterminds with ayahuasca from Entrepreneurs Awakening. Michael, thanks for agreeing to do this podcast.
You're so welcome. It's an honor to be part of the third wave. I love what you're up to. I'm really impressed, frankly.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Tell me a little bit about, what have you been up to with Entrepreneurs Awakening recently?
Yeah, I think the simplest way to frame it is since 2011, I have been leading executive coaching mastermind programs, primarily for tech entrepreneurs, not exclusively, that include a week in Peru to do ayahuasca. And over the years, that has grown both in impact and notoriety, and led to this conversation happening today.
And you just recently got back from an excursion in the Sacred Valley, yeah?
Yeah. I'm in the middle of this year's program. It's a Machu Picchu ayahuasca mastermind program. A lot of words. It's a 3-month program, and we work with the participants for a month before to prepare them for Peru, and also to clarify what it is that they're most struggling with in their deeper subconscious challenges that they feel are holding them back from being the most fully authentic, expressed version of themselves in business and otherwise. And then we spend 10 days together in Peru as a group, and then do a month of integration as a group and individually. So we're about 10 days since returning from Peru, and last week we did the one-on-one type integration calls, and this on Wednesday we have our full all-hands video conference. First time all the guys will see each other together since leaving for kind of an exciting week for me, I think for them too. So yeah, I'm coming toward the end of this year's program.
And what got you into this in the first place? I mean, how did you end up in this situation where you're taking entrepreneurs down to the Sacred Valley?
Although in retrospect, it was a very natural progression for my life. I was shocked that it came together in this way. I never imagined, like a year and a half or a year before doing this, maybe even, a year before my first program, I never dreamed that I would be able to bring these two worlds together. Mm-hmm. The two worlds being my lifelong interest and in ways apprenticeship with plant medicine, plants, psychedelic-based plants done in a ceremonial type container, usually in a tradition that is coming from an indigenous culture or a remix of those traditions. And my experience as a tech entrepreneur. 2004, I founded a tech startup in San Francisco, and we did really well, really fast. And I got to experience what it's like to go from 0 to 60 employees, which is tiny compared to most of my clients, but for me it was a really big deal. And do the whole rocket ship ride. And at the end of that journey for myself, I was really burnt out on working as many hours a week as tech entrepreneurs do, and relaxed into being an executive coach to other founders of tech companies, supporting them through stages of development that I'd already gone through. And so I was doing that while figuring out what I wanted to do next as an entrepreneur. And with the spaciousness having come from leaving my company, I re-engaged with a consistent plant medicine practice, attending ceremonies. And so, before long, it became pretty obvious that a lot of my clients, where they were struggling in their personal lives and professional leadership roles, had to do with psychological baggage from their childhood. And I'm like, well, there's lots of coaching tricks that can get you through that, and it works, and it takes time. Or we can spend a week in Peru and get like a year and a half worth of coaching done in one week. So it just became the most efficient and inspiring way to do deep transformation work for really busy entrepreneurs whose, some of my clients have hundreds and hundreds of employees. So there's a direct impact. When they change, their whole ecosystem of their company changes, and eventually the product and everything changes. So I think the first client was a private, where we went down just he and I to Peru. And that started from, I know he was going to Burning Man, which I can assume means he's psychedelic friendly, if not a user. And so, one of our coaching sessions, I'm like, hey, if I could do anything for you, it would be this. And I talked about a week in Peru. And the next day he called me up and he's like, let's do it. So that was my first client. And that was the first time my two worlds came together.
Can you talk a little bit more about that backstory specific to plant medicine?
Yeah.
What brought you into yourself, getting into plant medicine?
I feel like I was born a trillionaire in the sense that my mother and father grew up in the Bay Area. They went to college during the 60s. My dad was at San Francisco State from 65 to 64, 67. And he studied psychology and education. So I grew up in this kind of alternative, spiritual family culture that had great reverence for Native American spiritual tradition, as well as 60s psychedelic music. So, my dad had black light posters when he was in college and photos of him being kind of like a hippie. So when I grew up and sort of came of age as a young teenager, I was just fascinated by 60s psychedelic culture and psychedelics. What are those? And listening to Jimi Hendrix lyrics, and I'm like, what's he talking about? This purple haze stuff. So super familiar, intrigued, and it wasn't a cultural leap from my family origin. And I also experienced nothing but empowerment and support from my mom and dad, no matter what I was interested in. So it was just sort of a green light to follow my own spiritual inquiry, and that led to doing mushrooms and LSD, in my opinion, way too young. It happened to work out for me. I don't recommend that 15-year-olds do acid, but
it happens. I mean,
it happens like another more often than you think.
Yeah, another one of my really good friends, Brian, who is going to come into the Bay Area today. He's like doing his PhD, finishing up at Ohio State. He's like, he's from Portland, right? So he did LSD for the first time when he was 15 as well. And it's like, at the same time, in the Amazon or some of these indigenous cultures, you have kids who are much younger who are doing
it's the right age for an initiation. And I think it's interesting that enough Westerners, given the fact that we have no cultural context for this, are drawn to that consciousness expansion that psychedelics bring as a way of shifting out of being a child, early adolescent, into a young adult or a young adolescent. And if we were in a tribal culture, there would be like a serious initiation that always involved risking their lives. And if they had the right psychedelics, often it was just a psychological death, not a physical death. I mean, if you're in Kenya, you have to go kill a lion, and not all the kids made it. They didn't have psychedelics. So in the Amazon, it would be both a physical manhood challenge as well as a psychological psychedelic challenge.
Yeah, and so you had these experiences with LSD and mushrooms, and then where does ayahuasca come into the picture for you?
Yeah, so one of my best friends in high school was the kind of, I don't even know where he got it because his parents had no background or framework to it, but he became an ethnobotanist eventually. And so we were geeking out on deep plant medicine, and this is, I graduated in 1989. So no internet. Like we had to order paper zines from like esoteric catalogs to learn about peyote and how to grow. He was growing mushrooms in his closet in high school, which is not easy to do, even if you have internet support. Sure. So anyway, when we graduated, we took the money we got from graduating from high school and did a backpacking trip through Central America to go find real shamans and do an initiation ceremony And at that time, there was like literally had black and white Xerox zines. And we ended up in Oaxaca, Mexico, the Jimenez, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and did find an elder who was, for some reason, willing to do a ceremony for us. And we did a mushroom ceremony, which is their tradition there, as you know. And it was incredibly, incredibly profound, both the setting of having indigenous leadership, and the whole night his wife was singing songs in Mazatec, medicine songs. So to be guided into the spirit realm with songs that were evolved in a culture to guide you into the spirit realm by people who interact and live in a animistic spirit reality was incredibly different than anything I'd ever experienced on my own. So that was really, really profound. And also, I would call it really my initiation in the sense that I was never the same after, and I could not jive with Southern California culture. I went to high school in Southern California on the beach in Orange County, and I went back after that trip, and I'm like, fuck this place. I didn't know where else to go, and I had no mentor. So that's just a story that I was like a clear anchor point that if I want to get back to like expanded sacred consciousness during ceremony and setting like that, we'll do it. And then, my path went in all kinds of directions, but it wasn't until 2008, while my company was kind of at the peak of its challenges with the financial crisis, and I was burnt out and really tired. And my wife had convinced me that we should go to Peru to do ayahuasca. She wanted to do it for her own reasons. And I'm like pushing it off. I'm like, I can't do that now. If I do that, I'm just like going to text my partners from Peru saying, fuck you, you can have the company. I quit. I don't want to do this anymore.
Fuck all this shit.
Right? I don't know what, but I'm not going to come back to a computer. So that was my concern. But she was committed to going, and I'm like, I can't let her go by herself. Apparently the macho I am. And so we went, and once I met the people, I worked with Diego Palma, who's very well respected and one of the earliest pioneers in Peru for neo-shamanic ayahuasca ceremonies, and spent a week with him doing his program, which is fairly similar to mine in a lot of ways. I realized I owe him for that kind of blueprint, and it was amazing. And I fell in love with my company again. Like all the resentments and just depleted backlog of frustrations and fears were washed away. And I just came back to San Francisco, like excited and engaged, but not attached and free. And that distinction of like being like kind of the company, or in the company, but not of the company. What do they say? That's like being of the world, but not in the world. You know what I'm saying?
I know, yeah. I know what you're talking about.
I might have it backwards.
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys all know it better than I do. So yeah, it was like remarkable. And then I became really fascinated. I'm like, what the fuck? How does that work? So then I started studying and reading. And at that time, I didn't even know anyone who'd done ayahuasca. And in San Francisco, now it's like everywhere. Yeah. But at the time, there were like 2 or 3 people coming around a year from Peru, Peruvian ayahuasqueros. There were no Westerners that I was aware of that were leading it. I since now know of some old guard that from the 60s that were leading ceremonies, but those were really secret. But now, at the time, there was so little. And so I had to study and reach out a lot to learn, and then ended up apprenticing with a Native American medicine man for a year and a half, and with no psychedelics. It's like Red Road Native American spiritual tradition in a neo-shamanic medicine way. And that was super powerful. So great to have a very deep shamanic discipline that was not relying on any kind of altered state. In fact, we had to stay sober for a year. That when we were committed to a year-long apprenticeship with them, no intoxicants. It's like a Buddhist path. No intoxicants for a year. That was the worst Burning Man of my life.
What was the rationale behind that? Like, what was the reasoning there?
In the Red Road Native American tradition, as the teacher I respect very much, his name's Philip Scott. He's a Sundance assessor. And in that tradition, it's about a direct relationship with the spirits. And you cultivate that in a sober state. Like being intoxicated with plant medicine is very special and rare. In the Lakota Sioux tradition, they didn't have psychedelics. They didn't use psychedelics. The peyote came in much later. It came from Mexico and didn't even arrive in the United States until I think about the late 1800s.
Sure.
And then eventually trickled up to the Lakota. So it wasn't part of their tradition. And they do use it now in a very strict TV meeting setting, but it's not anything like what we're accustomed to in the Western sense of a plant medicine ceremony. Yeah, so that discipline of knowing how to hold a ceremonial container, how to connect and become a channel for the nature spirits someone who's practicing shamanic medicine will rely on to heal their clients was amazing. And it gave me the ability to discern really carefully and clearly other medicine providers who, for example, had never done a sober practice and only been in an intoxicated practice. And that, I believe, really informed my choices when it came to selecting the ayahuasquero that we've been working with for the last 6 years. Being able to hold my feet in two worlds, like I'm an executive coach to more than 50 venture-funded founding team members of tech startups in an average year. 90% of them have no idea about the medicine work or the Entrepreneur's Awakening program, less so due to all the press that's come out in the last 6 months. But yeah, to be able to, I'm not dependent on plant medicines for my personal spiritual practice in this way. And I think that when I partner or collaborate with people who don't have that as their foundation, I notice that the clients that I am best at serving have a hard time connecting, trusting, or relating to them because they're quote unquote too out there. Not for me, but just for my constituents.
Well, and I think for most constituents, I think for most people, it seems like this. I mean, you keep referring to like a neo-shamanic tradition, and I think there's certain language that's encapsulated within that kind of stems from this New Age movement, where we just had this soup, basically, of terms and ideologies and things. And I think
it's a big ass soup right now.
It's a really big soup. And when you have a practice or a purpose that stems from that soup, it can be a bit off-putting for those who come from a more rigorous or scientific or business-oriented background.
Yeah. Most of my clients are not they're not on a spiritual quest. They're interested in consciousness, but they're most interested in being the best versions of themselves and closing the gap between who in their hearts and minds they believe they can be as operating at their full potential as a human being, and feeling the pain of the gap between how they're operating day to day now and who they know themselves to be. And in conversation with me or friends, it's always referral based. My groups are filled through word of mouth referral. They come to trust that working with plant medicines in this way is very effective, if not even the fastest way to remove those subconscious obstacles that are just preventing them from being themselves. Like the common language in this last week in Peru is like, I'm changed. I feel like a changed man. I'm a better man or a better partner to my wife. You're not better. We just remove the schmutz and you're just more yourself.
Yeah.
Like you're not different. You're just more yourself. And yourself is a good thing. I believe that for all of us. I want us all to be more ourselves. Plant medicines for me is simply put as a process of coming home.
It's like a sense of getting in touch with that authentic self. Right?
Re-experiencing your true nature, both in this dualistic plane of I'm Michael and my true nature is being a bridge and being a blessing in people's lives. And then beyond that, true nature is not Michael. There's no dualism is an illusion. So you are my true nature.
That's another conversation that we could get into.
And way more fun. I'm actually, that's where my current passion is really
mysticism, or
no, like kind of hardcore Jed McKenna non-dualism.
Okay.
And what it's like to cultivate and dwell in a non-dual practice, like practice non-dual way of relating to the experience of being alive. And I most resonate with the way Jed McKenna describes that experience. His most recent book, Dream State, A Conspiracy Theory, I think it was like it's a nuclear bomb in the spiritual arena. Incredibly refreshing, inspiring. He's not the only one. There are lots of great non-dual teachers.
So, one thing I want to get back to, which you mentioned a few minutes ago, was this kind of sense of detachment that you had after you had these ayahuasca experiences.
Yeah, I played with that word a lot because detachment isn't it. Detachment is too close to disassociated. Sure. One could argue that I was detached before, and that's why I was suffering, or the suffering level due to my misperceptions of data stimulus my life created a sense of disengagement and detachment to not have to feel the emotional discomfort or pain. Upon return, and this is true, I'm getting these reports from the guys every day. We have a group text thread. I'm like, what's it like today at work? I'm fully here. I am excited and passionate, and I am not attached to any outcome. So detached engagement might be the best frame that makes sense to the average person. But I think if I really went deeper, it would be about engaged non-attachment. Because you're fully there. You just don't need it to come out any one specific way.
Well, yeah, you care, right? You care about the process. You care about this process of, you could say, improvement or engagement or, just being with the tasks or whatever that you're working on. But it's like, if it doesn't work out, you haven't attached your identity to the outcome.
Yeah,
right?
That's definitely shifted. I'd say another way to put it is the pleasure and success sensations come from the day-to-day journey and how you're relating to the journey. Rather than whether, in my case, with entrepreneurs that have a lot of investors funding their companies, it's like, will we be able to succeed in a way that our investors get their money back and I can buy a Tesla or whatever their ego goals are for. It's more likely that I can take care of my family.
I would like a Tesla, though.
I would like a Tesla too, man. The Model X blows me away. I just drove in one for the first time recently. I'm like, you gotta be kidding. This is not even a car.
No.
It's a completely different experience.
And what you're speaking to is like, even what you've then tapped into with Entrepreneurs Awakening, it's something that's happening like on a larger cultural narrative. I mean, we were just talking about the difference between Uber and Lyft. True or not?
Has the reputation of taking more than they give from the ecosystem, from the economy. And I don't know if that's true. Whereas Lyft has a different cultural value. And, you could say the same thing about there's Google and Amazon. Like in the entrepreneurial world, there's like Amazon culture and there's Zappos culture, or there's Amazon culture, or Apple culture, and Google culture. And one is like be the best at all costs and use people as a means to an end, speaking in black and white terms. The other is like serve the employees, elevate them, and create the best experience of their lives, and our business will succeed. Patagonia, same way. So being careful of getting too black and white, that it helps to create a frame for us to talk.
Well, and it does. And so the question that I had is like, how does ayahuasca or even psychedelics in general, how do they shift that narrative? You were talking about earlier this ripple down effect, right? What have you experienced with the people that you've worked with in terms of, is this plant medicine really catalyzing some sort of transformation that might change business for the better? Or are we just fooling ourselves and thinking, this idealist narrative of, if we give famous people psychedelics, it's going to change society?
Yeah, I think it's both idealistic and absolutely true. What I'm tracking is both the direct ripple effect of the changes that my clients experience in their companies, which is the easiest place to see it, and in their personal relationships. So here's what I believe to be true based on my subjective experience working with entrepreneurs. And what I'm tracking or looking at that inspires and motivates me is I'm really impact driven, because despite the controversial fact that my programs cost more than $11,000 to attend, which we can get to, I actually lose money every year on an annual basis by doing this program. I would make much more money if I just stuck around and did executive coaching. So I'm driven by impact. And what I'm measuring is, in the short term, how do they lead different? How do they show up differently in their companies and in their personal relationships? In the long term, what I'm seeing is as people, when they start working with plant medicines, often it's their first experience, certainly their first ceremonial experience of psychedelics, working with it, if not their first experience of psychedelics, period. Like, I jump people into the deep end. But they continue doing their work with psychedelics, And what you see is the companies, their moral compass changes. They become more people-focused. So CEO of a company with 300 employees came back and he immediately took over HR and reviewed all the HR policies for the company and figured out ways to make it much more people-centric, and working at his company as a personal journey for each individual and how you mentor them and what's their growth path, and being totally fine if that growth path leads them out of the company. But like really a much more people-focused company. I see that kind of like generically true to very greater or lesser degrees with everybody. So it's like people and personal relationships and relationships to nature become the priority. It doesn't mean they don't intend to generate the same profits that they intended to. They're just not willing to do that at the cost of humans and or the environment in a direct way. And then what I'm tracking long-term and the internal bet I'm making with myself is that we're going to see more innovative leaders like Elon Musk's come out of my programs. Like, they're pretty young. They're usually on their first or second company. And these are people that will probably do 5 to 10 companies in their lifetime. Mm-hmm. And each time they do, they're generating more capital and more clout to raise money. So before long, they are able to do global impact companies, and they all want to. So I'm really interested to see how working with my program and ayahuasca, changes their moral compass and has them making more heart-based decisions, and what companies that has them choose to create. And I've definitely seen people like go, I'm done with this company. Last year we had a co-founder of an arms manufacturing company and a co-founder of an alcoholic beverage company that their target market were college students. He didn't feel great about that anymore. It wasn't exciting. And so within 3 months of program last year, he had totally left that company to his partners and became the CEO of a new plant beverage protein drink that's on the shelves of Whole Foods, taking his beverage industry knowledge and applying it to organic, sustainable, healthy beverage. And the arms manufacturer gave notice and transitioned out and sold his shares and is now starting a large nonprofit project in Israel, using art and music to bring together people of different religious backgrounds to collaborate on projects. So like he's wanting to give back and figure out from that place what will he do next as an entrepreneur from that petri dish. So I feel really good that he's not putting his talent toward developing better guns, or in the case of the other friend, better alcoholic beverages. So that's just 2 examples. I think time will tell, and we're about 5 years into the experiment. And one of the things I'm excited to do this year is really take time away from producing retreats and go back and interview everybody and create essentially like an impact report for myself and see, like, just take stock on what's been accomplished and where I want to go from here.
And let's get into that in a little bit, kind of like what's next, because what I want to talk a little bit about that we've had conversations is like these transformations, right? So you mentioned these 2 individuals, one who had Four Loko and now is transitioning into organic, sustainable beverage, the other with the arms manufacturing. Something that you emphasize a lot is you can have these experiences, right? And people have a lot of ayahuasca experiences. Yeah. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of shamans who travel globally to do underground circles, and obviously there are a number in South America and Central America. However, the key to this transformative effect that you're discussing is creating a container that enables it to happen.
Yeah, I geek out on designing a set and setting and context that gets the best result. And I actually believe that the impact for any plant medicine is probably 80%, at least the depth of impact that I'm accustomed to being able to get from most of my clients is directly linked to the preparation process, and even more important, the integration coaching. And over the years, I've refined a process that I'm really happy with, and it just makes such a difference. And the people who have done a number of weekend ayahuasca ceremonies, once they step into my process, they're blown away by the difference in impact that having the front and back side sandwiching their ayahuasca experience. So much so that this is actually a new thing I've never talked about, that I've launched because it's somewhat controversial and my lawyer just greenlit it. But I'm now with colleagues offering prep and integration coaching to anybody who's doing a weekend ayahuasca ceremony anywhere in the world using our kind of tried and true method for prep and integration, with as hope to create much more impact. So many of us can't afford the time. I can't afford the time and money to go to Peru to do my own retreats. I can't. Got a family and gotta stay working. So I also depend on weekend retreats, do my own work, providing the best context possible for entrepreneurs to engage with this medicine while at home, without being involved with the shaman or the retreat itself, is the next wave of offerings that I'm excited to get out there.
What is that container? Not yours specifically, but generally, what should people look out for if they want to do an ayahuasca ceremony or even a psychedelic experience? What type of container? What type of...
You mean like the prep and integration type container? Or how do they vet an ayahuasquero?
More like how do they vet an ayahuasquero? I feel like...
I think we should do a podcast just on that.
Do you think that would be a topic in itself?
It's a rich topic because it's on one hand, it's super subjective. Okay. On the other hand, there's fairly objective criteria. I can see us putting together a podcast based on the research I've already done for that vetting process and having 2 or 3 ayahuasqueros participate.
That'd be great.
And really have a rich dialogue about it. And then at the end of that, you can produce the white paper and publish it.
Sure. So we just open that loop. We'll close it in a few months.
I really want that out there. I like to kind of joke with my clients, like you spend more time interviewing for virtual assistants than you do an ayahuasquero. Yeah. Like see people working with all well-meaning, of course, but like arguably part-time ayahuasqueros that are self-anointed. And I like the analogy is like if you're going to go to open heart surgery, would you want to work with a part-time doctor that's self-taught, or do you want a board-certified surgeon who's done 10,000 surgeries? Because you can have either. There are plenty of great ayahuasqueros out there. You just need to know what you're looking for. And I'd say 95% of the people I meet who are new to this in the last couple of years don't know what they're looking for. They don't know what they don't know. And I think it's our responsibility, you and I and others in the leadership positions here to help educate in a non-orthodox kind of way. Hey, here are all the flavors, different strokes for different folks, but if you're going to evaluate a Santo Daime, you should do it like this. If you're going to evaluate a traditionalist, you should do it like this. And a neo-shamanic hybrid ayahuasca ceremony, which are the most common, like here are the pros and cons of that.
And why do you think that's so important in terms of the experience itself?
All of us are different, and we are looking for aesthetic level. We have different aesthetics. We have different needs for requirements to feel safe and to drop our guard. And another great analogy is what I see often is a friend will say, "Oh, I did this ayahuasca ceremony and it was fantastic." I'm like, "Oh, great. How did you find it?" It's like, "Oh, my friend, recommended it." I'm like, "Awesome. And how many shamans has your friend drank with?" "Oh, just this one." "And how many times?" "I think twice." And so far, awesome. Nothing wrong with that. It's definitely the way is to find a friend. But it's also the equivalent of if you've never done yoga and I went and did 2 Bikram yoga classes and said, "Dude, Paul, you got to do Bikram yoga. It's the best in the fucking world. It's going to change your life, da, da, da." You're going to go Bikram yoga and probably have a really profound, awesome experience or not. But of all the yogas out there, is it really the right one for your body and where you are right now and what you really need? And is that particular Bikram yoga teacher even the right Bikram yoga teacher? Because as strict as Bikram is, every teacher does it a bit different, a totally different vibe. So ayahuasca is the same. It's as diverse as yoga in a lot of ways, and the ayahuasqueros, facilitators of ayahuasca, are as different as each yoga teacher. And so I'd say try different things, and I don't know of a good resource out there. There must be. I certainly don't know all that's out there. You probably know better than I, but I don't know a good guide to how to hire and choose an ayahuasquero.
And I'm not sure if there is one, to be honest. Yeah. It seems like there's a definite lack of quality information about ayahuasca in general.
Super subjective information.
Yeah.
I think ICEERS has the best objective description and education. Like anyone's like, "I want to learn about ayahuasca and how to choose," and like in absence of anything else, go to the ICEER's website and read what they write about ayahuasca and how is it right for you and how to choose. It's really, really great. The most objective and informative source I'm aware of.
And I think one other thing to add to that, this metaphor, this comparison with yoga. If you go to a yoga experience and it's not so good, you wasted $20, $25. It's like, whatever, right? But if you go, and we were talking about this earlier, you pick an ayahuasca shaman or have a ceremony and you spend a couple $100, but more importantly, you go through that experience and it's not quite what it could be.
Yeah.
You also lose out on an opportunity to go through an amazing transformative effect. And I think so the stakes are higher as well.
They're higher, and a lot of people go to Peru on these retreats and they're less than awesome. And then the other thing is like knowing what I know when I quiz friends that are new to this and have had, one or two great experiences and one difficult experience, something. Like when I evaluate with them what was great about their experience, I know that as great as it was, it's like 35% of what's possible. And they just have no frame of reference to even evaluate that. And that's not to belittle what they had. I just want them to know that there's so much more. And as you know, with plant medicine as a practice, it's infinity. There's always layers to the onion. There's always more to discover about this cosmos and consciousness and all the psycho-emotional baggage that you've accumulated in your lifetime or multiple lifetimes seems to be the case. Yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit about money and plant medicine because that's such a controversial subject.
Well, let's get into that because there is also when people have these plant medicine experiences, right? There's this sense that money is it kind of dehumanizes relationships, or it can.
Certainly can.
People perceive it as being this disconnector. People perceive it as being very ugly, very evil. Money is the root of all evil, as we say. What's been your experience? Because you do offer these high-end business masterminds and you integrate plant medicine into that. How do you kind of get your head around this idea of charging, what is it, $12,000 or something?
Yeah, this year
for
was
the mastermind?
$11,500.
Yeah. Give us some context on that. I think that's interesting.
Yeah. There's money's a hot topic, especially in spiritual arenas, and in the West always has been. I don't know that people in India give a shit about it that way or anywhere else in the world, but here we've definitely got money and spirituality in some kind of dualistic battle, and it sort of mirrors the Christian devil, angel, good versus evil framework, which makes me suspicious. It's probably the wrong debate altogether. But, talking to ayahuasqueros who are charging the normal amount and doing what they do, their goal is I need to charge enough money to be able to do this work without struggle and maintain my practice, living this lifestyle. The ayahuasqueros I work with, it's like they're almost monastic in their dedication and commitment to it. And it requires this work handling all their life expenses. And I don't know anybody who's using it as a scaling way to accumulate wealth and savings, except for two people that I won't mention. And there's probably more, but I'm only aware of two anyway. So what I'm happy about is that there are ayahuasca ceremonies for every budget. I know great providers that work on sliding scale and most likely wouldn't even turn you away if you couldn't afford anything. And I also talked to somebody recently that had a really deep healing from a long-term depression that was affecting her ability to earn a living. And when she did her ceremonies not too long ago, she was choosing between food and paying for the ayahuasca ceremony. And she did the ceremonies and was really grateful for that choice. But she rather than feeling like a victim about that, she felt really empowered that she was so committed to her personal transformation that she would rather eat top ramen for a week and not the normal organic fare in service of her own process, and felt like she got more out of it. And in a way that mirrors the dieta, the traditional approach to working with ayahuasca, which is like a period of austerity, essentially, is how we would look at it, but a period of saying no to comfort, luxury, indulgence, etc., in prep for meeting the medicine in a good way. And I don't think there's any shortage of great ceremonies available to people who are on any budget. I'm not actually familiar with very many expensive ayahuasca-only programs. I'm sure they're out there, and I'm just hearing about more and more high-end ones. And frankly, if people have the money and they want to spend it that way, they're going to spend their money on something. I'd rather them spend it on a super expensive celebrity whatever ayahuasca ceremony in Costa Rica rather than, I don't know, pick the way people spend money that you don't like.
Going shopping at Macy's or something.
Whatever. They have the money, they're going to spend it. Nobody's spending more than they can afford on an ayahuasca ceremony. Sure. Maybe somebody is, but and in my case, because people tend to hear my price tag, not even look at what I'm doing, and then like, those assholes charging $10,000 for ayahuasca. That would be ridiculous, like really ridiculous. In fact, the way it works for me and the way I frame it for my clients is they're paying for a business mastermind program that includes ayahuasca. The ayahuasca is free. They're paying for the business value of the relationships with the other men. Last 2 years, it's been men only in the program, who are all in the position to advise and invest in their businesses. So everyone supports each other's business. So we're creating a deep trust bond through the program and complementary business assets and skills, and they naturally support each other as brothers after. So the value is in that relationship, and the personal transformation from the ayahuasca is my world, my mind free, just part of the program. The same way that, so outside of the entrepreneurial bubble, people don't typically know what a business mastermind is, but it's essentially a exclusive business support group that tends to be anywhere from 6 to 9 months, maybe a year long. And many entrepreneurs join these programs to accelerate their network and resources, and also to learn faster from other business people in similar scenarios. And they typically, the costs for on the low end is around 8 to 12,000 for 6 to 9 months of the program, and the ones I would like to join are around 32,000, and then I have friends that lead ones that are 120,000 a year per person. The price is based on the value that the participants get out of the program, not based on what it costs to run the program or what they do during the program. So I'm in that service industry. I create business masterminds, and on the scale, it's like a funny paradox, because most of the people who comment are from the ayahuasca or plant medicine world, and they're like, oh my God, it's outrageous. And from the business mastermind world, my friends are like, you're underpricing us. Like, what are you doing? It's too cheap. You don't even charge for the trip to Peru. And I'm like, no, it's included. Because all these masterminds tend to have trips as well to like Necker Island to be with Richard Branson. And it's like an extra $30,000 to do that. And those programs are great. It's just different than what I'm called to do.
Are you the only one that does things with plant medicine, or are there other programs that also do?
I haven't done extensive research, but I haven't heard of any other business mastermind that is doing plant medicine in Peru, and particularly doing plant medicine that is in a indigenous lineage. The ayahuasquero that I work with is a lineage holder, passed down from his teacher and his teacher and his teacher, and he operates in a very traditional way. And that's increasingly rare, because the amount of years it takes to apprentice to inherit any indigenous medicine tradition, whether it includes plant medicines or not, is forever in Western terms, typically 7 to 14 years. So I can easily imagine a plant medicine weekend in San Diego with neo-shamanic Westerner practitioner, and that working great for a typical entrepreneurial business mastermind, but not like our whole program is based around that experience rather than it's just part of the experience. If any of that made sense.
It made sense. Where do you see, we'll first start with you, because I'm curious about you, and then we'll zone out into this larger framework. But where do you see this going for you? Entrepreneurs Awakening, and you talked about the prep work and the integration work. What do you think is going to be going on?
In this moment, I feel like I've just closed a hoop, closed a circle. I'm actually feeling really complete with the Machu Picchu Mastermind program in a way that I'm not sure I'll ever do another one. What I do know is I need to create spaciousness in my life to explore where my interests have spread and to get a little distance from the program. It takes a lot for me to run these. It's like attention nights and weekends for 9 months of the year. It's my second job, not my first job. So to get any perspective, I just need to stop doing it. So my intention for the next 6 months is to take a break, to just focus on my own personal practice and discover what I want to do, or it's even so much want. It's like more what is being called to be done, what is indicated that's next. That's also in alignment with who I am and what feeds me to do. And it'll very likely be something quite similar, but I don't know what it's going to be exactly. Certainly do love leading transformation retreats. If I could do that full time and live in Peru, I probably would, but I don't think that's in the cards right now. So.
Well, and so what have some of those challenges been for you? Because, to me, I'm sitting here across from you, what you're doing sounds amazing. You're leading these retreats. You do it once a year, once every 6 months. What's kind of not the downside necessarily, but what are those things that people don't think about that are actually, that's challenging about that, or that's difficult about that, or, it's not all rosy?
Well, yeah, leading retreats that are very psychologically challenging, by design destabilizing to people's lives in a foreign country with an audience or a group, the type of participants I have that have very high expectations and are quite demanding. It's a big process. So the interviewing and screening and application process, hours and hours and hours over months. And then once you have the selected group, then it's a lot of one-on-one to kind of get them all into the same place, and then you introduce them to each other, and then it's just a lot of high-touch, beautiful human relating, which, at the time I started this, I didn't have any children. It was I had the bandwidth to really go deep with this process and still have my quote-unquote day job as an executive coach. But in the intervening years, I've got I have a 4-year-old, and my partner of 16 years and I have separated, and we're working out our co-parenting dynamic and our new friendship and new relationship. So there's just a lot of transition and a lot of single dad 3 days a week. And I love my life. And it feels like what these type of programs require at the level I'm committed to delivering is more than I can do in a part-time job kind of way. Yeah, so it's a lot of touch. I haven't figured out how to calculate it per hour, like how many hours per participant per program, but I'm guessing it's 280 over a year, like what it costed. Yeah, so it's awesome. It's a lot. Just need to take a break right now. I'll be a dad full time, or I don't know. I'm ready to reassess and also go to the conferences and talk to people and see what's emerging. I mean, I have some senses of what's next, certainly in my very narrow but very deep focus. Mm-hmm. My crystal ball is fairly accurate, and I'm excited to see what's emerging, where the interests are. Ayahuasca is essentially a gateway to this world. And now that we're about 4 or 5 years of the early adopters in mass going through that gateway, their interests are diverging. We're seeing what's 5-MeO-DMT going to do for me? What's San Pedro or peyote going to do? What is a ritual or ceremonial use of psilocybin going to do for me? They're all different tools. They all offer different forms of healing and insight. So right now, it's fairly easy, if you will, to fill an ayahuasca retreat in Costa Rica for somebody. But in 3 years, and be like, ayahuasca, whatever. Who's doing 5-MeO and San Pedro? So the interest is going to shift, and regulations are kind of coming in. People will be better informed, I hope. So yeah, we're definitely on the frontier of a third wave that has no signs of letting up. I don't even think a legal crackdown would really slow it at this point. The genie's out of the bottle, and 10 years, 30 years from now, it's going to be I don't know. What do you think? I think it's probably going to be the preferred method for psychological healing and transformation globally. Yeah. And the countries that make it illegal will just miss out on a massive economic market. The amount of money people spend to go to Peru or Costa Rica to do this just because it's illegal. Yeah. If it were legal, it would be like Sedona, where everyone would be going to do this, and Arizona's letting out on losing all that tax income. Yeah. Oh my God.
Well, this is like what's going on with cannabis. Yeah. Obviously, right now, and I think
we'll see the same with psychedelics.
I think there will be some aspect. My hope, though, that with psychedelics is because of their very nature. When you go through a psychedelic experience, it tends to be fairly anarchist. Yeah. It tends to be fairly egalitarian. Obviously, hierarchy is natural to humans, but after we go through a psychedelic experience, we're more cognizant or aware of the hierarchy.
Yeah, and the limitations that it brings.
So I'm hopeful that it will remain kind of localized in a way, right? That people will be able to go through these experiences, whether that's ayahuasca or mushrooms or 5-MeO-DMT, and they'll be able to do it in various communities, and that the money, the economic activity that's generated from that will go towards, like, for example, repairing a lot of the colonialism and indigenous harm that we've, as white men, we've inflicted upon.
And that's a
people.
hot debate, like how much of this plant medicine economy is actually getting back to the cultures that it came from, and should it? And, for a third generation Western plant medicine provider who has no relationship to any specific indigenous culture, do they owe an ayahuasca tax to the greater Amazon basin? I don't know. Like, who owns plant medicine?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what's neat about psilocybin in a way, is that although it's a deep tradition in the Mazatec tribe, it's kind of considered, it's not really linked to an indigenous culture.
It's a mushroom that grows everywhere, right?
Yeah, and then also the synthetics, which are getting better. I mean, this is something also I've seen with the chemists that are following the tradition of Sasha Shulgin, who have been influenced by ayahuasca in a way that Sasha never was, are more interested in designing chemical compounds that have, like, the empathogenic, heart-opening qualities of San Pedro with the deep psychological opening Pandora's box of ayahuasca and a softening of the edge that MDMA has. And they're designing chemicals that do that. Actually, very likely, more likely than not, that within a couple of years we will have a few pharmacological chemical substances that are more effective in just psychological personal transformation or treating PTSD or deep traumas than any of the individual plant medicines out there. And it'll be just a different way of working. It won't replace ritual, ceremony, vision quests, and indigenous cultural style. It'll be the Western approach. They make colonies on Mars. God knows why they want to do that, but they're not going to be bringing ayahuasca up there. They'll be bringing pharmahuasca.
Sure. And one, this I think speaks to what's going on. It's like there's this aspect of customization.
Yeah.
Where if you have an individual who has X, Y, and Z needs, they can find context or a container with a specific substance that will catalyze the transformation they want, right?
And for better or for worse, I subjectively think it's for the worse. I mean, it's just what our culture does.
Sure.
And we're so beyond just like refining, like, oh, it's better if it's 15% different. We're just a culture of connoisseur specialists. It's like, look at wine and look at beer in the last 30 years. It's like everything is like, no, I like it when it's 13.2% and it comes from this and that blend and this blend and that, and that gives me the right high and taste. And like, okay, in the Amazon, it's a little bit more one size fits all.
Sure. Drink the medicine,
the bomb,
right? Yeah.
But that's what we do. That's what Western culture does. We discern and innovate and create something new, and it's often disruptive to what came before. And we're all on this ride toward
somewhere. Probably death.
Nowhere.
I would imagine death.
It's hard to objectively see any evidence that we're headed for anything other than extinction.
Sure.
Or a big reset. And, what Earth does.
Yeah, we're part of a larger organism, right?
Yeah.
We don't have as much control as we think we do.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else?
Do you want to add anything final in terms of, what we've spoken about with the business masterminds that you're doing with ayahuasca? If people want to find out more information, I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I would love, if you're interested in anything I'm up to or these topics that we discussed, I intend to start doing a podcast of interviews that I think will be very interesting and informative. And as I release more programs and services that expand beyond just the high-end program in Peru, it'll all be on entrepreneursawakening.com. And I'd love to support anybody who's wanting to do a deeper transformational process with any plant medicine, but particularly ayahuasca, in the form of doing a coaching, prep, and integration package for them. Got some of the best people in the world on my team, in my opinion, and the impact is just so incredible. You get that kind of support.
Great. Yeah, I think that'll wrap it up. So thanks again for doing this. We have this beautiful view of
the bay,
and I mean, this is gorgeous.
It's my tree house.
That's right. Yeah, this is beautiful. So yeah, we'll wrap it up there. And thanks again for doing this.
Thank you, Paul.
Welcome back to the podcast. This is the end of the podcast where we're starting a new section where we will answer 3 questions that you guys have about psychedelics. So question 1 comes from Heather. How would you recommend getting proper and accurate dose sizes from a 250 microgram tab? So Heather is asking about this within the context of microdosing. If you have a tab, how do you accurately measure out a microdose so you don't take too much? That's a really good question. We have an article on our website about volumetric microdosing for LSD. That is definitely the best way to dose the LSD tabs. You should see our guide in the show links. The basics of it is as follows. You take the LSD on blotter paper and you submerge it in distilled water. You wait 24 hours and keep it in an opaque container, something that's brown or blue or whatever, where light can't really get in. You use distilled water. Don't use alcohol. Don't use mineral water. Use distilled water. It's simple. It's easy. Use distilled water. You put it in the container. You submerge the LSD in it. You put the container top back on. You store it somewhere in like a drawer or something, and then you wait 24 hours. And based on the amount that's on the tab, based on the amount of water you put in, and based on the size of the drop, you will have an approximate amount for microdosing LSD. Zach Latif asks, what schedule do you find best for microdosing? Every 4th day at 20 micrograms works best for me. How would every other day work? Or would tolerance be too high? I think the first thing to emphasize is it depends on the individual. So trial and error is typically the best way to create a customized protocol for yourself that works for what you want it to. However, I still like to stick with Jim's protocol that you should really do no more than 2 times per week. I had another friend who just asked me this earlier today, and I told her, look, yes, microdosing is great. It's making you feel better. It's giving you more energy. It's helping you be more creative. All of these things are fantastic. However, what's going on is a process of healing. What's going on is a process of creating new neural pathways. And although it is appetizing, although it seems like it would be great to do it more often, you need to give your brain and your body and kind of your space time. Just be patient with it. You don't need to do it more than 2 times per week. 2 times per week should be more than enough, and give it time. There is short-term tolerance. People are doing it. You could do it as much as 3 days per week, 1 day off, 1 day on, 1 day off, 1 day on. We recommend sticking to 2 days per week. It seems to provide a little bit more balance in people's lives so they don't go too manic or they don't struggle with insomnia or start having anxiety. These substances are strong still. They, especially with LSD, they're dopaminergic, meaning they will increase energy levels, so you want to make sure that you can manage it well. Diane Selton asks, have there been any hard-grounded studies on microdosing LSD yet? So let's define hard-grounded first. There have been no double-blind placebo-controlled studies. So Beckley Foundation just rolled out a crowdfunding campaign through Fundamental, where they're trying to raise money for microdosing LSD for creativity and problem solving. There are also a few other programs going on at Imperial College for microdosing, which the results haven't been released for yet. I know there are, I won't name names now, but there are a few other institutions in the United States that are potentially looking at carrying out studies as well. So there have been no double-blind placebo control. However, Jim Fadiman has released studies of his survey-based microdosing research recently, but that is more statistical, and it basically compares an experimental group who is self-reporting their experiences with microdosing to a control group who is just self-reporting generally. And what that research showed is that microdosing likely is effective for depression, but basically for everything else, we really don't know. There needs to be more research done to come to certain conclusions about the efficacy of microdosing. So those are the 3 questions for this week. If you have a question that you want to ask me that I will answer, please go on Facebook, write us an email, on Twitter. We are answering your questions, and I can't wait to hear them. Have a great rest of your week, and thanks again for tuning in.
Thanks for listening to the Psychedelia Podcast with Paul Austin. Want more psychedelic information? Go to our website at thethirdwave.co and register for our email list and newsletter. Also, please consider donating to The Third Wave via our Patreon page. Donations make this podcast possible. Psychedelics have the potential to transform lives. By donating, you enable us to continue to inform people about the benefits of these powerful substances.